From the Washington Examiner, I'm Siraj Hashmi, and this is Hashing It Out. I'm joined by Congressman Lance Gooden, a Republican from the 5th Congressional District in Texas, freshman member. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Congressman, first of all, getting into this stimulus package about coronavirus, this is the third stimulus package that's gone through both houses of Congress. You voted yes.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Well, first, let me say to the readers or the listeners, I voted about an hour ago.
Mm-hmm.
We voted by a voice vote, and it was curious the way that went down. This is the first serious voice vote I have witnessed or been a part of since I got to Congress just over a year ago. And technically, I could have said nothing, and it would have passed anyway. But I came out for this once I knew that the leaders over in the Senate were okay with it. I spent a lot of time reading the bill, and there are some things in it I don't like. I don't love that we are doing things like funding the Kennedy Center at $50 million. Some of my constituents back home, they had some misinformation. They were under the impression there was stories going out that Congress was getting a raise. That's not the case. There's $25 million in there for congressional staff to deal with all the teleworking that's going on. We've got a lot of new things going. Capitol Police is getting some money. The physician, I believe, is getting more money for medical supplies, but there's no congressional pay raise in there. But I was happy that this took a few days. I'm not happy necessarily that it stalled, but I'm happy that over the course of the last few days we've been able to really kind of see, are there any poison pills in there? The Speaker got into the talks with the Senate leaders, I believe, on Sunday night and Monday, and that's when they proposed a lot of things that were totally unacceptable to Republicans. Those issues like the national mail ballot program, that was all taken out. And so one of the messages I had to my constituents was, if $50 million for the Kennedy Center is the worst thing in this $2 trillion bill, then that's a win.
$15 million, that's different from what's been out there. It's been about $25 million. That's actually been reduced by $10 million?
What are you referencing?
The Kennedy Center.
Oh, no, I said 50, 50.
50?
Not 15. I believe it was 50.
Okay.
Yeah, and so
So it's double than what people have been saying.
I believe that's correct. And that was one of the things that I kept talking about with my constituents, my colleagues, was every time a federal budget passes, no matter who's in charge, there seems to just be so much pork and junk in the bill. And that's why you have so many no votes that are against the federal budget bill whenever that is passed over the summer. I believe that's coming up. But for this particular bill, as expensive as it was, the fact that the most talked about controversial issue in this bill was the Kennedy Center funding, I think, speaks to the bipartisanship. The fact that no senator voted against it, 96 or 98, however many were there, all voted for it, is a testament to how bipartisan it really was.
Yeah, the interesting thing that people have been pointing out, because the 4 senators who were not present for that vote were all Republican. John Thune from, I believe, South Dakota, Mitt Romney and Mike Lee from Utah, and then Rand Paul from Kentucky, all isolated from either being ill or being exposed or having tested positive to coronavirus. Rand Paul probably would have voted no on that.
Perhaps, but he wasn't there.
Right.
And it's interesting, too, what I witnessed today was, there was talk about Thomas Massie from Kentucky holding up the bill. He wanted to have a record vote. It was fascinating to watch the Speaker and Kevin McCarthy really work to make sure that members were there, so we had a quorum. Even the president came out maybe an hour or so before the vote and just really slammed Thomas Massie.
Called him like a third-rate congressman.
Yeah, said he should be kicked out of the Republican Party. I mean, that's pretty intense when the president...
And you got John Kerry basically agreeing with the president on this.
It was very strange in the sense that Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump and everyone seemed to be on the same page.
Why do you think he did that?
Well, I think that the president wants to get this signed into law for the American people. I think he wanted it done many days ago. And to have one member grandstand, to quote the president, but I agree with him, was frustrating. And I believe that Thomas Massie, these are rumors, but they're generally true when it's so specific. But the rumor was that Thomas Massie spoke with the president and said, I've got to do this. And so the president said, I'm going to be against you, and made good on his
on his promise. Interesting.
Via Twitter minutes later.
Well, one thing that's
and interestingly enough, Thomas Massie has a Republican primary challenger.
Okay.
And his primary has not passed yet. So my primary is back on Super Tuesday, but Kentucky's is coming up. So this will be really interesting to watch how his race goes, having the president against him. And he never got his record vote. So if you were watching the proceedings, he stood up, he called for it.
Yeah.
A certain number of members have to stand up to show support. They didn't. Then he said, well, we don't have a quorum. Speaker ruled that we did, and so he never got his record vote. I don't know what he accomplished.
I watched that exchange. It took all of 43 seconds for Massie to stand up, voice his objection, and then for him to be shut down.
Right.
And for it to be passed and adopted.
And some of your viewers might say, well, isn't it the job of Congress to be there? Shouldn't they be there? The answer is absolutely yes. We shouldn't be criticizing someone for following the rules, but this was something that was agreed upon. It was going to pass except for the vote of one person, and we are in a national crisis that we've never had before.
Yeah, so obviously the Thomas Massies of the world, this is a very controversial bill. But you also have the progressive left, say, the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes or the Bernie Sanderses of the world.
But even AOC didn't.
She didn't object.
But she was there. She behaved, for lack of a better term. I hope she doesn't see this and take that the wrong way. But she would know what I'm talking about.
Right.
She didn't need to cause trouble to still make her point. She still made her point, and
her point was that there was somehow $500 billion of corporate bailout money. Obviously, that accounts for all the businesses that are not small businesses.
Right.
And small businesses account for 99.9% of all American firms. So it's that that's 0.1% of American firms getting $500 billion. Small businesses, I recall, getting somewhere around $350 billion.
That sounds about right. Yes.
Do you think there's any way this could backfire?
I mean, if I had a crystal ball, I wouldn't be sitting here with you.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we've got to do what we've done in this bill. We can't afford to let our airlines fail and the entire country shut down. We can't afford to let corporations that have historically employed great numbers of people fail. And I think that some of the strings that will come attached to some of that loan money are not all that bad, because the argument that airlines squandered all of their record profits on stock buybacks, that's actually a decent argument. These are airlines. They have been through tough times. They've been through downturns. They've been through terrorist attacks. The reasonable onlooker would say, why not have a pretty hefty reserve fund, because you know that there will always be a crisis in the future. And I think airlines know that if anything gets really, really bad, then the government's going to be there to save them, which we showed today that that's the case. But at least in this package, there are some strings attached. They can't spend money on that until they've paid back the loan. They've got to make sure that they're keeping employees on staff. I hope we don't send the message that just go ahead and raise salaries, buy back your stock, and if you don't have any cash during difficult times, then we, the government, will be there for you. I hope that's not the message they take away, but there's an argument to be made on both sides.
And House Speaker Pelosi, she in the lead up to the voice vote of this $2 trillion stimulus package, she mentioned the possibility or the actual consideration of a fourth bill on the horizon. Do you have any idea what that looks like at the moment?
I don't. I heard her say quite a bit this week, we need to have this fourth bill so we can go and pass X, Y, Z, and this bill will start in the House. And these are some of these Democratic far-left priorities. I don't know how much of that is just talk to appease the far left, who was saying, well, hey, I want a roll call vote. I don't know what promises were made in exchange for people like Alex Ocasio-Cortez not calling for a record vote. I just don't know, but I know that the fourth phase 4, whenever it comes, will probably be huge, and we'll get there. But no one really knows how bad this is going to go. This is so unprecedented. It's so difficult because we don't know how bad it gets, and we don't know when it ends. It's not like if there was a terrorist attack or a bomb went off, God forbid. the bomb goes off, you know how bad it is, and then you rebuild and move forward. We're still in the process of this bomb going off, for lack of a better term. We don't know how bad it's going to get. We don't know when it's going to quit. We don't know how much it's going to cost. So we could say we're going to do phase 4 in a week or 2 or 10, and that may not be soon enough, or it may be too soon.
With respect to how this particular stimulus package worked, at the end of the day, do you think it will have the intended effect that Congress wants it to have?
I sure hope so. I don't know for sure that it will, but I can't imagine it being any larger today. $2 trillion is a lot of money.
That's double than the 2 stimulus packages, more than double than the 2 stimulus packages passed
Right.
after the 2008 financial crisis. That was like $983 billion combined.
And what's scary is back then they were, whoever was here then, it wasn't me, I was not here, but they were attempting to stimulate the economy after a downturn. There were businesses that some had made bad decisions. In many cases, there are businesses have not made bad decisions. I realize I just slapped the airlines a little bit, but the airlines did not cause this downturn in business. It was not a business decision that caused their revenues to drop. It's a business decision that they don't have enough cash to weather it, but it's not a business decision that their revenues have dropped like they have. And so this is not a bailout. This is not a stimulus. This is a rescue package, which is very scary that we're having to rescue at this level. And so the hope is that we can perhaps avoid a recession and, God forbid, not be in a depression type situation.
Some critics of Congress have thought that this whole stimulus package is simply just an act of performance as a whole, that this rescue package of $2.2 trillion is simply just Congress trying to show that they're acting and that this stimulus package actually isn't going to do anything. What do you respond, or how do you respond to that?
I mean, if it's not going to do anything, then the response to that, if someone's saying, hey, it's not going to do anything, so are you saying we shouldn't have done it?
Mm-hmm.
I've got some critics back home and around that say, not necessarily just of me, but of Congress, that the package shouldn't have passed, that we are overreacting. I mean, if we do nothing, what do we say to small businesses that are closing, restaurants that in some cases will never open again, people who have lost their livelihoods just in a few weeks? This isn't over time. There haven't been signals that have shown the economy is deteriorating. The economy was great a month ago, maybe less than that. And now we're in such a terrible place. And so we've got to do something. Maybe some of those critics are saying it should have been more, and we'll probably then agree with them, hopefully. Hopefully we won't need to agree with them, because hopefully this just magically turns itself around, but it doesn't seem to be going that way. So I think what we did today was absolutely necessary. The fact that everyone was for it, with the exception of your Thomas Masseys and, I mean, far-right Tea Party conservatives that have historically been against everything. Louis Gohmert, who was working against making sure that the Phase 3 bill was appropriately vetted before it finally passed. He was for it today. He even came out and said he supported it. So to see the spectrum of people be for this, I can't imagine that it wasn't the right thing to do. Was it perfect? No, of course not. But it was definitely needed, and I suspect a Phase 4 will be needed. But I think we need to wait and see just how bad this is, see what we missed in Phases 1 through 3 before we jump onto Phase 4.
You and I were both in our 20s when the 2008 financial crisis happened, and obviously the economic impact on younger people was probably a lot more significant, because for a lot of those kids coming out of college, like myself, there weren't a plentiful amount of jobs out there, and a lot of people, I would say, young people, decided that they would defer whatever jobs they're going to go back into school, accrue more student debt, and then all of a sudden you see the student debt bubble surpass, $1.5 trillion or however many trillions of dollars it is. But how do you think this compares, what we're experiencing right now, to the Great Recession or the 2008 financial crisis?
Almost no comparison. It's so bad. And just walking through the streets of Washington, or pick your city in America, it's dead. It's unlike, there was never a time like this during the 2008 downturn. We've got shutdowns. I mean, the airports are just, it's it's crazy quiet,
Mm-hmm.
and
It is.
life
Absolutely.
as we know it is at a standstill. And it's not just in the U.S; it's everywhere. When you talk to your friends in other countries, they're all doing the same thing. And the unknown, the uncertain future of this, I think, is what's so frustrating to people. I can't remember the last time I had several weeks on my hands with nowhere to go and only a telephone. And that's where I find myself. And I'm not unique. Everyone in America is thinking the same
Right.
thing.
And everyone around the world for the most part.
I remember telling my wife I would love to, if we had the time, wouldn't it be great to just take a month off and do something fun if we had the time and the money?
Yeah.
Now we have the time, don't have the money,
Right.
and don't have the ability to do anything. And you got parents at home that are not working and they have their kids at home. It's hard to work from home when your kids are there also, if you're
Sure.
used to your children being at school. And so people are having to juggle that and raise children and do work from home and be together nonstop.
And if they have a loved one or a friend who's currently,
And
if
help,
they've,
yes,
if they've
that's
been
right.
diagnosed with coronavirus and they're in the hospital, I mean, how do you
Right.
how
Or
do you
let's
then
say
provide support
they
to
had
that
cancer,
person?
or
Yeah.
maybe they have an elderly parent or
Right.
grandparent. Because people are still having car accidents.
Yeah.
There aren't as many cars on the road, but people still get sick. They have to go to the hospital, and the hospitals are already starting to crowd up. So
Yeah.
we've got to have this turned around soon. And I'm not a scientist. I'm not an expert, but I think I speak for every American when I say that I am absolutely sick and tired of this, and it's really only been a couple weeks.
Yeah, we'll get into the public health response in just a second, but how soon do you think we'll get back to what's considered normal? Do you think this is the new normal?
I'm a delusional optimist, which is how my friends would say. I just think everything is going to be great.
Mm-hmm.
Every campaign I've run, every tragedy, I've always just said, "Oh, it's going to be fine. We're going to get through this." And so I feel like the new normal is not a normal. I think
Mhm.
it's just new for now, and I feel like we'll get through this. And my hope is, I would like to think by May the 1st we'll be semi back to normal. Or even the president says Easter.
April 12th.
His critics say that's impossible. But wouldn't it be great if by Easter we had reached our peak and we were declining? I don't know, but I can't imagine living like this for many weeks more, much less months.
Yeah, because obviously, I think it was the WHO or numerous media outlets, whoever's recording the amount of cases
Right.
of coronavirus in the United States surpassed China. If you want to believe China's statistics or whatever
Right.
information is coming out of there, reportedly speaking, it surpassed China. So technically, right now, the United States has more coronavirus cases than any other place on Earth. Do you think that the Trump administration has been handling this to the best of their ability, or are there specific areas that you think they're lacking in, or are there certain areas that you think they're excelling in?
I think everyone's been handling it to the best of their ability, whether you're Donald Trump or Andrew Cuomo or Gavin Newsom out in California.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not an expert.
Right.
I mean, I guess one could say, wouldn't it have been smart? I heard someone said this to me, though, that they said, if you add up the number of ventilators that are projected that we will need, and each one costs X number of $50,000, I'm just making this number up.
Sure.
Say they cost $50,000. Multiply that by however many thousands we need, and we're at several $billion. Wouldn't it have been cheaper to just have several billion ventilators in storage somewhere? And I said, well, yeah, but no one knew this was coming, and certainly not quick enough to build that many ventilators. If I told you that a gas attack was coming and the whole country was going to need gas masks, would you run out and fill your storage with a bunch of gas masks? No, you wouldn't. You'd say, you're crazy, you're overreacting.
Right.
If I'd have told you 3 months ago, if I'd have said, hey, there's this virus in China, I think it may come here and be really bad, we should pass a bill, spend a whole bunch of money, and make sure we're prepared. Every one of my colleagues in Congress would have said, what are you talking about? You're crazy. I see what's happening over there in China. But anyone that criticizes the president for not having a crystal ball, when no one else was saying we need to do X, Y, Z, that early back in January, when there were people that were saying, hey, this is coming, but I didn't think much of it back in January.
Mhm.
I don't know many people, I'll say a few people, I don't know many people that said back in January, hey, we need to be ready for this in case it gets here. But I think the president has a great team. I feel like the kind of the controversy between, you read about and see him and Andrew Cuomo in New York, they kind of go back and
Right.
forth, and Bill de Blasio. I don't think much into that.
Or even Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Yeah, I don't think that he and Dr. Fauci are quarreling, but I think the media likes a good story.
Drive a narrative. Given the information that we knew in January and February, you told me off camera that you knew just as much as everybody else did.
Right. Mm-hmm.
One particular senator, Republican, Richard Burr from North Carolina, after an all-senators briefing in January 24th was the date of it, there was a story on him last week about him selling off all of his stocks in the immediate, say, week or so after that particular briefing. Some people are some of his critics on both sides of the aisle, not just liberals and Democrats, but conservatives and Trump supporters and Republicans have called on him to resign. Do you think he knew some special information that most other people did not know, or do you think he reacted accordingly to whatever he was feeling at the time?
The answer is I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't know either. And
that's the problem, is that we don't.
Yeah. It stands to reason that he would know based on his position.
Sure.
But I don't know. It certainly looks bad, whether he knew or not.
Yeah, the optics are terrible.
And I don't, the senator.
Kelly Loeffler?
Forgive me for forgetting her name, senator. But, she was criticized because she unloaded a couple $100,000, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I can't fathom having $500 million in my bank account, which she and her husband apparently do.
Right.
And so
their husband's the CEO of the New York Stock Exchange.
And so that's interesting. But one thing I actually do believe is when she says that was all done without my knowledge. The one that may or may not,
that's highly possible.
It's highly possible, because what she should say, it would be a little uncomfortable for her to say it, is, I'm so rich, I don't even know how my money is spent.
Right.
Because that's what really she's
saying.
saying.
You don't want to say that, obviously, if you're a public official,
I was thinking she should have said, listen, guys, I am so rich, I don't even know who manages my money and how much gets managed and what gets done with it.
Right.
For all she knows, one of her 50 investment advisors could have seen a story and say, hey, in case this gets bad, let's dump this stock.
Or it could have been a tripwire type of case where, like,
so I don't know.
A certain stock hit the certain threshold and they had to sell all of it. And then obviously Dianne Feinstein, Democratic senator from California, she came under scrutiny for her selling her shares. Although that was, I looked at the details on that. That was at least a month, roughly a month after that briefing. So I don't know if that was in relation.
It certainly looks bad.
Right. But if we're going to talk about, say, what information Congress knew at the time, when China, say, reported out, or the Chinese government, for example, let's focus on the Chinese government, because we can't obviously assign all blame to China, because the Chinese people are probably just more subjected to this authoritarian communism regime as pretty much the rest of the world is. But there was a cover-up there in China, and I think a lot of people have been critical of China, but we don't obviously have the capabilities to figure out how to deal with them. What should be done to counter them, say, in the future? How do we approach them?
Well, I'm working on a few angles for Congress to pursue. Those will come out probably in the next week or so.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to get through this emergency rescue bill, but there's a lot of talk about holding China accountable, whatever that may mean. But if you go back to January, when those numbers were coming out, we didn't know whether or not to believe those numbers. We all assumed that whatever number they gave us was probably underreported. Mm-hmm. And so, and then now we see these stories about how they have it under control. Do they have it under control? I don't know. One thing I would agree with is that China could better get their citizenry to do as their government says than we could here, because if they're told to stay in their house and not open the door, they're going to do as they're told,
right?
Because it's the regime and how things work. So it would make sense that they would be able to manage anything better that requires citizen participation. It's hard in the United States to tell people they can't go about their lives, or they can't go outside, they can't go to the grocery store, et cetera, or run their dog through the park. That's easier to do in China. You saw those videos, remember, back in January?
Yeah.
They were chasing people. The cops were chasing people in China. People
they
were
shutting up. They were
crazy,
putting basically boards up on buildings to prevent people from leaving.
Yes, and so I couldn't imagine it getting that way here, which is why perhaps it's spreading like it is. But I think China should absolutely be held accountable, and our government needs to look into just how responsible they were. Lots of unanswered questions, and all disturbing ones.
Focusing on sort of how the U.S. is handling it internally, do you think a national quarantine or say a stay-at-home or stay-in-place order is necessary to sort of find that, sort of get over that hill and see a decline in cases?
Well, the answer is I am not an expert, and I don't know. But based on what I read and what I determine from reading from the experts and different opinions, it seems as if that's absolutely necessary in some of these hotspot areas. But I also don't quite understand what a shelter-in-place means, a shelter-in-place order. We have that in Dallas. I represent part of Dallas. There is a shelter-in-place order, but it doesn't mean you can't leave your house. It means you can't congregate in groups of over a certain number of people, that any non-essential businesses are closed. But even here in Washington, D.C., everything's closed. We're not necessarily under a district quarantine, because I walked here to this building today and passed several people on the sidewalk as I did. So I don't know what kind of authority a national quarantine, what kind of teeth that would have. I know in the state of Texas, no one is going to prevent me or my citizens that I live and represent from going outside of our house. That's just crazy.
Yeah, if you want Texas to secede from the union, that's probably the quickest way to do it.
I cannot imagine the governor of Texas telling me I can't leave my house. And even if he did, I can't imagine the sheriff or the chief of police in the city I live in or the county I live in saying we're going to start arresting people.
Yeah, even the lieutenant governor, Dan Patrick, had some very controversial statements on Tucker Carlson, saying that, and I'm sure, and he's not the only one who said it, about getting, basically reopening up the economy and just see how it goes.
Yeah, the lieutenant governor didn't quite say it as eloquently as someone could have said it, because he said grandparents should be willing to die for the economy. I wouldn't have said that.
Yeah.
But there's an argument to be made that if you're not worried about it, then why should you be prevented from participating in the economy? I worry about it for the elderly people in my life, family members, but I'm staying away from them. Obviously, I got on a plane to come to D.C. I've potentially been exposed the whole time I was here. Who knows?
How many people were on that plane?
I think about 30, actually.
Really?
But there are so few flights now between
so they just try to
Dallas and D.C. that they have more people on those planes.
Interesting.
I think that's my theory. But
and you're, sorry to get into this little tangent here about flying on airlines, but were you guys packed like sardines? Was there space between?
There are enough open seats to where you had space.
Okay.
And so I wasn't packed next to anyone. No one else was, to my knowledge. But I think the thinking is that some people, if you are comfortable enough to go to the airport and get on the plane, then you're not worried to the extent that perhaps someone else is. I've had meetings with people that had on gloves and seemed very worried about it. I'm not one of those people. I grab the hand sanitizer, but I'm kind of the mindset that I'm going to get sick if I'm going to get sick. I'm not trying to get sick, but if I get sick, we'll deal with it.
Yeah.
Many of my colleagues are now reporting that they've tested positive, and it's concerning, but there's part of me that agrees with some of the argument that we've got to really push to get back to normal sooner than later.
Do you think a lot of people, at least within the conservative movement or on the Republican side of the aisle, are taking this seriously enough?
I think they are, but I think their definition of how serious is this kind of varies. One could say that maybe you're so focused on one aspect of this that you're not serious about the economy. So some could say I'm not serious about the personal freedoms of the people I represent if I say I'm coming out for a national quarantine. Some people that I represent say they would rather get sick and even die than be told that they can't enjoy their constitutional right to liberty. And that's something that sentiment is more felt, I think, in rural areas where people are watching these big, large cities. People in the rural areas that I represent, they say, hey, we don't want this here. We don't want to get this, but we don't want to hide in our homes because people chose to live in the large cities where obviously it's going to be more difficult to contain something like this. A lot of people in rural areas say to me, this is why I don't live in the big city, because we don't have those problems. Now, this is totally different. Your viewer would say, well, they're about to have these problems. That may be the case, but the rural community, I think, it's going to be very difficult for a rural town to get it. Like as long as they're shutting the schools, which they are. I don't think is there a school in America that's open?
I have no idea. I don't think there is.
I don't think there is. But the rural areas, if they're going to get this like the city of New York has it, it's going to be a while before they do.
A constant theme during this public health crisis is the shortage or alleged shortage of personal protective equipment, better known as PPEs. That consists of the disposable gloves, the gowns that they wear, surgical masks, and even face masks, eye protective wear. But there's also the N95 masks. There's obviously the case of ventilators, which you mentioned before. I'm even hearing from people in the medical field that I know about shortages of blood.
Right.
Blood transfusions. Obviously you're not an expert, but what can you do as a public official to ensure that we don't have or continue to have a shortage of these essential items?
Well, one of the first things I did once it was obvious that this thing is trending badly was I got on the phone with all the hospitals in my district. And I think probably every other member of Congress has done the same thing because I've talked to many of my colleagues. And I said, what do you need? What are your problems? What can I help with? And a common theme was one hospital said we're running out of hand sanitizer. And one said we're about to run out of this or that. And then in all of this, I got to thinking, well, you're not even full yet. So you're already running out and you don't even have coronavirus patients in yet.
Right. And you're already running out of hand sanitizer.
You're already running out. So that right there tells me they weren't prepared for an off event.
Yeah.
So that's something that's got to change moving forward. If hospitals didn't have enough hand sanitizer and masks to at least get through a few bad weeks, then they are, I won't say living month to month, but they don't have a supply that they need. So I want to look at that once this calms down to make sure that we never have these shortages, these short-term shortages. I understand being able to say, hey, in a month, we're going to probably run into trouble here. But there were hospitals that had issues that were just a few days away, and they didn't have a single coronavirus patient in their hospital. And I heard that and thought, that doesn't seem right. But I've talked to a company in my district that had made alcohol, and they switched to making hand sanitizer. But they were hesitant to start making it. They said, we can start making this stuff tomorrow, but I don't have the proper permits, and it typically takes a while. Should I go ahead and start making it, or should I wait for the permit? I said, are you asking me? And this person said, yes, I'm asking you. And I thought, well, the reasonable thing seems to be to tell them to go ahead and start, and we'll figure out the details later, because these are not normal times. So I said, go ahead and start making the hand sanitizer. Make sure you make it correctly, and we'll work on the permits tomorrow. This was at 9 p.m. And so we worked with them and got all that worked out, I believe, within a few days. But the executive branch is really guiding much of this, and there are political clashes, it seems, with Mr. Cuomo in New York and the president that I don't know that are helpful from either side when they're bashing each other. I don't know that this is the time for that. But then you look at people like Gavin Newsom in California, who was saying good things about the president's response a week or two ago. And so if Gavin Newsom in California is praising the president and Andrew Cuomo is down on the president. And then Andrew Cuomo came out against this $2 trillion package that we just passed
saying
today.
It's not enough.
And yet Senator Schumer, who has represented New York longer than Mr. Cuomo has, I believe. I don't know my New York history that well.
Oh, no, Schumer's definitely been a New York senator longer than Cuomo's been governor.
Yeah, I did know it that well. For him to come out and say, hey, there's plenty in here for New York. New York is a big winner, made me think, well, if Senator Schumer thinks that Mr. Cuomo is winning on this deal, then how could one say that the president is, for lack of a better term, screwing over New York if Mr. Schumer agrees that this bill is good? So, I don't know what to believe. I'm not in New York. I'm not on the ground. I'm sure you could find a far-left Democrat who could find a reason to blame the president for something and make some political hay out of it, because that just seems to be the thing. But there seems to be less of that than there normally is. I even remember thinking as I was walking out of the Capitol, I laughed with a colleague and said, don't you miss the good old days when we were all
just
fighting and we at least could go have dinner afterwards, and our constituents had normal lives and they were happy, and now everyone is sitting 6 feet apart.
Yeah.
If you thought we were divided then, politically,
we're
physically divided now. Yeah.
But kind of focusing on, say, not just only the shortages of PPEs, ventilators, hand sanitizer. In the case of, say, health professionals, they get sick because they're exposed to it. They're working on the front lines.
It's terrible.
It's very bad. And there are policies that for a lot of hospitals, these health professionals, whether doctors, nurses, work in any other part of say the emergency room, the intensive care unit, they are basically handicapped by this.
In New Orleans, which is a hot spot,
Right.
Heavy hot spot. I believe I saw something a few days ago that 60 or more of the employees at one of the main hospitals there had tested positive. So that's immediately pulling 60 needed employees out of that hospital. They're now home trying to recover. Perhaps, God forbid, they'll become patients because things will get worse.
Overloads the system.
Overloads the system. My brother-in-law is a physician in Shreveport, which is about 5 hours north of New Orleans. And he has said it's not as bad in Shreveport. It's not that bad there yet. Hopefully never. And they have been asking doctors from surrounding areas to come down to New Orleans.
My dad is a heart surgeon. There was a doctor in Norfolk, Virginia, in Southern Virginia, who had to call out sick because he got, whether it was a stomach bug, he's not sure if it's coronavirus or not. He has not gone through a test that I know of. But literally on my way over here, my mom was telling me that my dad had to drive all the way from Toledo, Ohio, where he lives, down to Norfolk, Virginia. It's a 10, 11-hour drive to cover for this heart surgeon because they're so backlogged. And this is not even, if you're a heart surgeon, you're not really treating coronavirus patients. But obviously, people have heart attacks all the time.
Sure.
And there are emergency personnel that have to be basically ready to go all the time.
Or if you're a heart surgeon and you have a wife and children, maybe you have an elderly parent or grandparent in your home, if you're asked to go to New Orleans or New York and work in a hospital, are you going to be excited about potentially getting it? And then do you go back home? What do you do?
And not to mention the health professionals who say, like, if they get sick, what protections do they have? Do they have paid sick time leave? For some of them who I've talked to, they either have to use up all their vacation, use up all their paid time off, and if it goes beyond that, then they have to owe that money or owe that time back. So is there anything that, say, maybe you could advocate for in the fourth coronavirus stimulus package to make sure at least health professionals are covered in this respect?
The answer is yes, and the health professionals are going to end up being the heroes through all of this. Once this is over, probably long before this is over, and even now we see these harrowing stories about the healthcare professionals that are in some cases literally giving up their lives. I don't like to use the word literally as much as everyone else, but in some cases they really are sacrificing their lives. You look at these stories in Italy, doctors and nurses are getting sick and some are dying, and that's even happened here. And the thinking is none of them need to worry about financial issues, and we need to make sure that they are especially taken care of. If you're working on the front lines, then we're going to have to make sure that we absolutely take care of these healthcare professionals in that phase 4 round. And even long after this, I suspect we'll hear all kinds of horror stories about time off and pay, et cetera. And I want to make sure that we do right by these people.
And sort of focusing a little bit on not only just the current healthcare professionals who are licensed and they have everything that they need. There are a lot of healthcare professionals who are on the horizon of being professionally licensed, say the fourth-year medical student,
Right.
or the senior nursing resident, or nursing student, I should say. Should we fast-track them and try to get them back
Yes.
into the workforce?
Governor Abbott of Texas has even said, just last week I heard him say that if you are a nursing student and you've already gone through the training and you're just waiting to take the exam, we're not going to hold that up. You can go ahead and get to work. And the answer is yes, we're going to have to fast track. It's like the regulations on the hand sanitizer that I spoke about earlier.
It's do you think that will be adopted on the nationwide level?
Perhaps, yes, I think so. It's like some of these experimental drugs. I heard a comment that these malaria medications don't work. There's no science behind them. Excuse me. I heard that there's no science behind them. There are cases of them working. At this point, if you've got a patient that is taking a turn for the worse, we're not looking for, when I say we, I guess I'm speaking for doctors, probably shouldn't do that, but a doctor who has a patient that's taking a turn for the worst is not looking for an FDA-approved treatment. They're looking to save that patient's life. And in the case of relaxing regulations for upcoming nursing and medical students, I think we absolutely need to do that, because this is a crisis. This is an emergency. This is not an everyday situation, and we're potentially just getting started.
Congressman Lance Gooden from the 5th Congressional District in Texas. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. God bless America. We'll get through this.